Happy Friday. Glad you're along. And we roll into another weekend here. Just seems like I said that the other day. David Jacobs, Professor David Jacobs, has written it remains, in my view, one of the most important books ever written on the UFO ET abduction phenomena, the reality of it. David has spent a lot of time on it. His book called The Threat came to the conclusion, and he mentioned it right on the program here and off the air to a million other people. He said that whatever the program is or was, he felt that the abduction program had pretty well been completed. He felt that whatever was being done had been achieved or very closely thereto. We don't know what the program is about. We think that potentially there are different types of beings coming here, abducting humans to study them like we abduct and study smaller animals and plant specimens, bacteria, viruses, you name it. It's the idea of learning. Controlling is another factor. But David Jacobs felt that the process of abductions had pretty well reached its zenith. And I found out last week, and I didn't know this, that Dr. Bruce Cornet, when he was on, had been abducted. I have been trying to get hold of abductees, current abductees, for the last couple of years. There just aren't any out there who want to talk about it, and maybe there aren't many out there at all anymore. I don't know. But the abduction that happened to Dr. Bruce Cornet is available right under his name and guests. We're going to talk about that tonight. It is truly a classic. Happened at night on an oil field drilling well site, was observed by the night crew. How much more dramatic can it get? I mean, they watched it happen. So with that in mind, let's go and say hello again to Dr. Bruce Cornet. Hello, Bruce. Thanks for being back.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me. Yes, a lot of interesting things I can talk about relative to my own personal abductions. One of the things I need to state right off the bat is during these early abductions in my life, I had no idea that I had been abducted. Back in 1981, the concept of abduction was only gradually being made known to the public. I mean, the Travis Walton case and the other cases that had existed were pretty much relegated to small groups of people interested in the phenomena, but not to the media at large.
Did you read David's book, The Threat?
I have his book, and I read part of it. I have not read all of it. I was pretty much turned off by some of his ideas at that particular time, because I didn't feel that my abductors were, a threat. I didn't know what they were, but I wasn't going to categorize them as negative at that time.
Right. I'm not sure that he absolutely felt that the word threat was entirely negative. It was perhaps a threat as an intrusion into our way of life here, which certainly it is. Anyone taken against their will is a kidnap victim, an abductee, and we've all heard the horrors of the tests, the experiments, the probing, the prodding, and all the rest of it. So I don't know, but I do know that the book was written by someone who had studied this for a long time, and he has a lot to say. It might be worth revisiting at some point when you have the time. I'd like to compare your experience to what he looks at in terms of the template, the average kind of profile for an abductee. Would you say that you're aware of most of your experiences at this point in your life? How many were there, by the way, while we're talking about that?
Okay, I do not know the total number, but I do have conscious recall or recovery memory of 9 that go back to age 8.
9. Wow.
And the earliest abductions I learned about basically under very strange circumstances, and I didn't realize what they were. I just had these memories come back at me like deja vu, and I didn't really connect the dots and know what was going on at that time. This was back in 1953, 1954, and then later on in 1962 and 1963, I had encounters as well. I wouldn't call my 1963 encounter an abduction. Because it involved my actually meeting two human-like ETs. I didn't know they were ETs, just simply because they looked completely human, talked very well. They were very intelligent, spoke English, and I would have had no idea that as to what their affiliation was until at the very end of my 3-day encounter with them, when I asked Maya, if we could communicate, correspond by letter, because I was very infatuated by her. And she said, no, that's not possible. And I had thought, based on her understanding of Amsterdam, she was my guide for Amsterdam. We were there for 3 days, my French class, coming back from Cannes on the Riviera. My French class went there to spend the summer learning French, etc. And on our way back, we stopped in Paris and then stopped in Amsterdam. And the first day, I walked down to the lobby of the American Hotel to meet some of my other male friends, and we were going to all go out and tour the city. We were given pretty much carte blanche. And there was this pretty young lady, short, standing off on the side. And when I made eye contact with her, she came over, and she said, may I ask what you were doing? And I said, well, we're trying to figure out where we're going to go. Then she said, oh, hi, my name is Maya. Would you like me to be your guide here in the city? And it just floored me. I mean, what are the possibilities of having a total stranger come up to you and say, I would like to be your guide in the city? And I assumed, based on that statement, that she knew the city. She had been here. She knew the places to go. And for the next 3 days, I met her in the morning, and we would go out and to the different tourist sites, museums and zoos and stuff like that. And it was fascinating. We had lots and lots of conversations. And I was growing infatuated by her. I mean, it was almost uncontrollable. I was 17 years old. I'd graduated from high school. And I wanted to know, why she was interested in me. On the last day, she said, we're going to go back to the zoo. And I asked why. She said, I want you to meet my friend, Lyra. So we went back to the zoo, and I met Lyra, who was in line to get into the zoo. Then we went on and visited different localities and tourist attractions. And at the end of that day, she said, I would like you to take me back to my room. Well, I had assumed by then that she was, was living in Amsterdam. Yes. And but she was living in a boarding house just a few buildings down from the American Hotel. And we went up the elevator and to her room. And at that point, I didn't know what was going to happen. I almost thought, well, maybe she's going to invite me in, but she didn't. And I said, can we continue, corresponding? And she said, no, that is not possible. I said, why? And she said, I do not live here. And I said, where do you live? And she said, I live in the mountains. I said, what mountains? She said, the Andes Mountains. And that blew me away. I mean, it wasn't as if I disbelieved what she was saying. It was just out of the ordinary for a stranger to volunteer to be my guide in a strange city that I'd never been to before, and then tell me we couldn't correspond. And she was very attractive. I like to think that she was just reeking in pheromones. that, I was just, falling
You're
over
17
her.
years old. You didn't have a chance. I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't have a chance. She was pretty, and when she said, I live in the mountains, in the Andes Mountains, I couldn't understand that. Well, I said goodbye, and it wasn't, that was 1963. Now, 27 years, well, from 63 to 95, that would be what? Almost 32 years later.
Right.
I met Dr. Carla Turner at the Ozark UFO convention in Arkansas.
Let me stop you right there. I had the greatest pleasure and honor of having Carla on the program a number of times. What a wonderful person, and what a tragic loss.
Had her? Yeah, you talked to her and you knew her?
Oh,
Holy
yes.
cow.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
I mean, she blew me away. I mean, I had an opportunity to sit at a table and talk with her there at that conference, having no idea that she would be dead in a year. That really floored me. And she told me about this book that had just come out called Masquerade of Angels. And I wanted to get a copy, and she told me that I needed to talk to Ted Rice. And she had invited him to that conference so he could tell his story, because the Masquerade of Angels, her book, was about Ted Rice. I had no idea what this was about. It was just a suggestion that she had that I get the book and read about his story. Well, when I read the book, I was blown away. It was all about Ted Rice meeting Maya and Lyra at the Sun Valley Ski Resort in Idaho a year before I met them.
How can that be? How can that be? You must have been just speechless.
Oh, God. And it goes into so much detail. A lot of it, Ted Rice was able to recall through the help of hypnosis. And, it's detailed conversations with Maya, who was the leader in that twosome group. In fact, he had gotten an offer to work at that ski resort on his high school summer break. Okay, he was probably only about a year older than I was, and on his first day at this restaurant where he was being a waiter, he saw this pretty girl that took an interest in him, who was also a waitress at there, and he started talking with her.
This is Sun Valley, you say? Sun Valley, Idaho?
Yes. And
what year would that have been, Bruce, approximately?
The summer of 1962. And I met Maya in 1963, 1 year later. And when she was there, she took him on walks. And in the story as it goes, the listeners should get that book. You can get a PDF free online, download it, and read it. It's just absolutely stunning about all of the things that Maya asked her. And when I was reading that, I would say, wait a minute, these are the same types of questions Maya was asking me in our conversations. We even talked about space travel. And he was falling head over heels for her, too. And a few days after he met her, she introduced him to Lyra. And sometimes they went as a threesome, walking around the different paths in and around the ski resort, which is a very large area.
I worked there in 1967, 68 as a kid. I had a job there.
Oh, my God. Oh, holy cow. Well, guess what? Ted Rice, in his book, says he even Shirley MacLaine was there at the time he was there. And he got to meet her. And, of course, Shirley MacLaine writes, wrote the book Out on a Limb, including the story about her story about Maya. So what's going on here? This seems like a classic setup. At any rate, at the end of the story, the last day he was going to be there before he flew back home, they met him and arranged to meet him, and then they went on a walk up into the mountains. And he was wondering, why are we going so far away from the ski resort? They got up into a canyon someplace, and there was this spaceship that had been hiding in that canyon. And they boarded him aboard the spaceship, and they flew him to their underground base in the Andes Mountains. I mean, he had been trying to find out where she was from, and all that she would ever say is, "I'm from the mountains." She would never give any information about herself. She would only ask questions about him and what he liked, what he wanted to do, what he thought of this and that. Well, in that story, this was largely brought out by Bartholomew, who is Carla Turner's hypnotherapist, who regressed to Ted. And that was an amazing disclosure about what happened when they got into their underground base. They met these other people that were in the base. They all looked human, and Maya showed him how they were cloning humans. And then they said that you can transfer the consciousness to these clones. And he didn't believe it. He said, "No, that's not possible."
When you say, well, I missed that, Bruce. You say transfer the what to the clones? The contents?
Their consciousness.
Oh, consciousness. Okay. All right. That's wild. Yeah. All right.
And they said, "Well, would you like us to give you a demonstration?" And so he agreed, and they laid him on a table next to a clone who was alive. And but she was neutral in terms of her, I guess, a blank slate, so to speak. And they transferred his soul to her body. It was a female clone. And when he woke up consciously, he found himself in this female body. And I was reading this in Carla Turner's book, and I said, "Holy cow!" You know, and of course, Ted was freaked out by this, totally freaked out. And he said, when he saw that he was standing in this nude female body, and he said, "I wanted to be put back into my body," which is a normal response.
I
would
say,
did.
Yes.
And then after that, they flew him back to the ski resort, where he could then get a transportation back home the next day. But this was an extraordinary piece of information. In fact, it overshadows everything else that he talks about with Maya and Lyra. Nevertheless, there were these two women. They're both short. They're both pretty. And I met them a year later in Amsterdam. And I didn't know who they were. I had no clue. Why would they be interested in me? Why did they select me? And it was clear that this was all part of some sort of larger setup. At any rate, the connection between me and Ted's story was the fact that they said they lived in an underground base in the Andes Mountains. Well, most everybody who thinks about ETs thinks they are from out in space. They don't realize that many of them are these civilizations from other planets are now living on Earth. That have been living on Earth for long periods of time in underground bases where they can control their environments very well. They don't have to deal with pollution. They don't have to influence the humans on the surface of the planet. They can live independently and without the knowledge of people on the surface. So one of the things that I am rather pleased about is that I was so infatuated by Maya, that I wanted to get a picture of her. And I asked if I could take a photograph of her, and she said, "No, I don't want you to take a photograph of me." But at one place that we went to visit, a winery, she was talking off on the side of the hallway, and I went out into the courtyard, and I asked some guy to take a picture of me, knowing that she would be in the background. And And so he took a photograph of me, and she didn't know that I had taken a picture of her.
Ah, yes.
And so that is the picture that you put on your website from a previous interview.
Uh-huh.
And she's a pretty young girl. She looks young. She's only about 5 feet tall. She comes up to just my shoulder height. She has brown curly hair and a pretty face, a thin body, and wearing normal human clothes. So nobody would even suspect that she, with her command of the English language, that she was non-human, or at least a clone of a human with an ET spirit or consciousness in it.
Right. All right, hold on right there, Bruce. Good place to pause. That Carla Turner's book, when you read that, your jaw must have been hanging down. That's astonishing.
It's one of the few books I couldn't put down, and I read it from cover to cover.
I believe that, yeah. All right, hold on a minute. We'll be right back with Dr. Bruce Cornet. What do you hear about his abduction? One of the 9 that he's aware of, coming up. Yes, if any of you listening would like to hear Carla Turner, and your subscribers, just go back into the archives. You'll find her there. I think we had 4 or maybe 5 programs we did. We did quite a few. And then she was gone. Just strange. Very sad. All right, Bruce, 9 accesses to abductions. That's a lot of mental territory to cover in your mind.
Yeah.
Do you remember details about each one of them?
Most of them. The first one was back when I was 8 years old. I don't recall that, but I knew that it had to have occurred because a year later I was abducted again and taken aboard a craft, and they did a medical exam of an implant that they had put into my optic nerve at the optic chiasma, where the optic nerve crosses. And how I discovered this was quite unusual because they had given me a screen memory that I would not remember what had happened. And it wasn't until about a year or so later at the end of elementary school, my last year at Sedgwick High School in West Hartford, Connecticut, that I was in a class, and they brought a cameraman in from the local TV studio that was all very new. I mean, televisions back then were just coming on the scene and being available to the general public. All black and white, except for there were colored television sets, but they were way too expensive, and only the rich could afford them. And we didn't have a black and white television set at that time, so I was very curious about, what is this thing? And the cameraman that came in with a studio camera and a monitor, a television set, which was connected to the camera, was showing how whatever he imaged on his camera would show up on the screen. And then, interestingly enough, one of the students in the class asked what would happen if he pointed the camera at the monitor, at the television set. And he said that you would only see the television set being reproduced again and again in a feedback loop down to infinity at the center of the screen. And so he did it, and that was like deja vu for me, because I knew I had seen that before, Jeff. It was so clear in my mind that I'd seen that same image before, of a feedback loop between a camera and a monitor. And suddenly the screen memory that I had been given to block my memory of the abduction dissolved, and I remembered all of the details of what happened aboard that ship. And it was absolutely, I was troubled. I didn't know what to think about it. I just knew that this information was there, that I was with a whole bunch of other kids about my same age aboard this circular craft, because all the halls were curved inside this craft. And the first thing that I remember is that they took me into this examining room, put me on a table, just like modern day X-rays, and rolled this device over my head. And I remember them telling them there are gray, small grays, and large, tall gray, that we're just examining the implant we had put into your head to see how it had grown into your optic nerve. And I didn't know what they were talking about. So after that, we were taken out into this curved hallway, and there were all of these stations going off the side of the hallway on the outside, towards the outside of the craft. And they had us pair up in twos, and each of the pairs went to a different monitoring system in these along the side, and which consisted of basically a modern type of computer terminal system with, it looked like it had keyboards. It looked like it had, a screen, a monitor screen in front of it, and the tall gray had told us that when we went into our with the technician, he would switch to our various frequencies, and we would see what our partner sees in with his eyes, because the implant that they had put in us was imaged a portion of the retina that in our peripheral vision, and their computer was able to reconstruct the entire vision of what we were seeing through the information that came from this little implant that it was embedded within the optic nerve. And when they switched to my buddy, I could see wherever he turned, I could see on the screen what he was looking at. It became very obvious. And then the technician switched to me, and I couldn't see what he was seeing on the screen, but when I looked at the screen, suddenly all I saw was the screen decreasing in steps down to infinity through a feedback loop. And I was told that this is all that you could see. You couldn't see what you were actually seeing, because if you looked at the monitor, this feedback loop would prevent you from seeing what your buddy saw. And that really sunk in. Okay, I mean, it was, first off, it was an exam to determine how the implant had become ingrown with my optic nerve. Secondly, there were a whole bunch of other kids that were in that craft. We were all given, obviously, the same kind of implant. We were all taken in pairs to these terminals, and we saw what our buddy saw, okay? And that was blocked. So when I was in class watching the technician, show us how a television works, when he pointed that camera at the monitor, and all you could see was the replication of the screen to smaller and smaller and smaller through a feedback loop, it was so powerful to me that it just overcame whatever screen memory or block that they had given me, and I remembered the whole event. But, at that age 9, I had no idea what I was remembering. It didn't make sense. Wow. It's like you had some missing time, and you find yourself on this ship out in the middle of the ocean, and you were with these other people. And then suddenly you found yourself back at home. I mean, how could you explain something like that, right? I mean, you would have no idea of how you got there and why you were there. So it didn't come to understanding until many, many years later. Now, if I was 9, I didn't realize what had happened in 1992. And so, I was about, 30 years old at that time. And at that point in my life, I was being deliberately awakened to a lot of my previous experiences. And that is one of the things I keyed in on, because as soon as I realized that I might be an abductee. I wanted to know what other memories do I have that I can't describe or explain. They're out of place. So that's when I began first to realize that in 1981, with that well site abduction, that I had actually been abducted. I mean, at that point in my life, I thought I had never seen a UFO. Literally. I had wanted to see one. And we were drilling several wells in the Richmond Basin near Richmond, Virginia, from June to October of 1981, and it was a very exciting time in my life. I'd never been in a situation like that where I was the president of my own independent oil company, which I'd started with a number of other oil people from Houston, and we had found an independent oil company out of Dallas that was willing to fund us. And so here I had my first opportunity of actually drilling for oil, and in a wildcat.
That's pretty
area.
wild. Sounds like a movie. Yeah.
Yeah, and I came to work. This was the second well. It was the Bailey well that we were drilling. And that morning I came, and all the rig hands were talking about what the night shift, the night tower, had seen, and about this UFO that hovered over the field next to the well site. Wow. I thought, well, maybe if I stay late this night,
you might get a chance to see it. That's pretty exciting. Yeah, so you're processing this. Tell us what happened.
Right.
This is wild.
Yeah, and so I put in a full day's work during the day shift, and then as the evening rolled around, I was getting really tired, and I told the mudloggers that I was overseeing that I'm going to go into the back bunks at the back of the mudlogging trailer and take a nap. So I climbed up into the top bunk and wanted to take a nap. And I told Rick, if the UFO comes back, come and get me. I don't want to miss it. Okay?
Right.
I mean, there was a sense that I had that it might come back. I mean, why would it ever want to come back? And so
how did they describe? Excuse me. It's nighttime. The night crew is there drilling. It's lit up. You got lights on these drilling rigs. I've seen them at night, photographs and stuff. So this UFO, what did it look like? Did it hover right over the lighted drilling rig? Where was it?
Okay, no, it was off over the field. Maybe a few hundred feet to 500 feet or more from the actual well site. That was a clearing that they had cleared out and put all their equipment on, and the mud pits and the trailers and et cetera, and the drilling rig. All of that was in this rectangular area called the drill site. And outside of that was a cut field of forest, the forest that had been recently cut for timber. And so all you had are these straggly trees that they didn't cut down, sticking up out of this field, and of course the bases, the trunks of all of the trees that they did cut down. And that's where the craft, the crew that said that the craft had been hovering over that open area, which was previously a forest. And
were they kind of dumbfounded by this? How was the crew? How did they act?
Yeah. The night crew that had seen this was talking about it. We're talking like, wow. Even one of the new pushers, he says he was just hovering there. And so he popped a few beers, and he said, finally got enough courage. He says, I'm going to go out there. He gets into his truck, and as soon as he puts it in the first gear and tries to drive out towards it, the craft takes off. And so he was very disappointed, but the fact is that, they had all these different people talking about it, and there were at least 12 people there on the drill crew that night.
This was a major sighting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was not that far away. And the craft they described was circular and had these rotating, multicolored lights on it. It's a classic, saucer-shaped UFO. And so I wrote this down in my journal, my will log journal. I actually have a comment about that the night crew had seen the UFO hovering over the field next to the well site. And so as the night wore on, I put in a full day, maybe 10 to 12 hours, and I was very tired, and I told Rick, come get me. We'll go in the back and take a rest, and not thinking anything would happen. And when I was sleeping, trying to fall asleep in that top bunk, suddenly I was awakened by these three beings that were hovering over me between myself, the bunk, and the ceiling of the mud-logging trailer, which wasn't too high. It was how in the world were they floating above me in that small space? And one of them took this rod and touched my forehead, and then it caused me to levitate. And then
okay, hold on, Bruce. I want to point out that under Dr. Bruce Cornet's name, there's a link. See the fully documented abduction here. And he's got it all written up, like the scientist he is, shows the location, photographs of the drilling rig, the operation, you can see that. It's all there, explained perfectly. So you're in the trailer, right? The picture of the trailer we see?
Right.
That's the trailer.
One of those pictures you can see a girl sitting on a bunk in the back. That was she was sitting on the bunk underneath the one that I was sleeping in at that time.
Right.
And in a couple other pictures, you can see two people in it. One a girl and the other a man, Rick. He's the one I wanted to wake me up. I felt rather confident that they would obey me because I was their employer. Okay? So,
sure.
So when I was suddenly awakened when I was trying to fall asleep by these three small beings hovering over me, and then they touched me with this rod, and I became levitated, and they all passed me through the wall of the trailer. That is when I freaked out. To see this wall of this trailer pass through my body visually. I mean, it didn't make sense. Would it have made sense to you or anybody else? I don't think so. They would not understood what world was going on. And I think I imposed on myself amnesia potential because it was too horrific to even imagine what was happening. And when I was brought back, I suddenly was awakened in the bunk, and I woke up after the abduction. I was freezing. Literally, my body temperature was below normal by about 5 to 7 degrees, I'm sure, maybe more.
Right.
I was hypothermic, and I was shaking, shivering, and all my joints ached, and my testicles ached. And so I didn't know what the hell had happened. I pulled myself out of the bunk, down onto the floor, put on my boots, and walked out into the front of the trailer, which is the larger part of the trailer, and where all the workstations were for the mud logger. And there was nobody there. Now, this is a 24/7 drilling operation. The crew is working, continuously as the well is drilling. The mud loggers will be collecting samples on a regular basis and then analyzing them and recording their results on graphs and charts. And where is everybody? So I walked to the opposite end of the room where the door was open at the door and looked out and at the drilling rig, and the drill stem was just slowly turning in place on the rig without anybody attending it. Nobody on the drill platform. Nobody around the drill platform.
How can that? Oh, that's all right. So yeah, all right.
this didn't make sense. So I so where did the crew go? Everybody's disappeared, and they went to step out of the mud lugging trailer, and I looked around to the side, and over there in the corner of the well site were the entire drill crew standing huddled together, looking up into the sky at this craft that was hovering there over the cut forested field. And as soon as I saw it, it took off. And the people in the drill crew started to come back to their stations at that point. And I said, I'm not going to go out there. I'm too cold. I was shaking. I was shivering. And when Karen and Rick got back to the lugging trailer, I said, what were you doing out there? And he said, Rick said, we're looking at the UFO. I said, well, why didn't you come and get me? And Rick said, we did, but you weren't there. And so I was incensed at that point. I said, he must be lying. So I grabbed his hand and I walked with him back to the bunk. And I said, did you look in this bunk? Thinking that it may have done a cursory examination and not seen me. He said, yes, and you were not there. And then Karen started to talk. She said, we saw you being taken by these three small beings in a beam of light over to the UFO and being transported to that. And, what am I going to think? Is my entire drug crew going crazy?
Now, they watched this happen. This is at night. You were taken through the walls of the trailer. They're outside, and they're seeing you floating through the air.
Yes, in a beam of golden light, or a lighter. It was brilliant, light enough that they could see the light beam itself, and I was floating in that beam of light with the three aliens that were carrying me. And they saw me being brought back into the trailer. And, I couldn't believe it. I mean, this is crazy. I've never experienced anything consciously that I thought I had. And so I was so shaking and in pain, and I've got to go back to the motel room right now and slip this off, and which she did. And after that, the drill crew didn't talk about it. Nobody talked about it after that. They were all blown away. They didn't understand what happened any more than I did. And they couldn't believe their eyes. But Karen and Rick had told me enough that night to indicate what actually happened. And it wasn't until 1995 when I was hypnotically regressed by Fred Max and that I recovered all of the details of that abduction. And here I had thought I had missed seeing the sighting of a alien craft. I had the front row seat. I was the object who was taken, the person who was operated on. And if you read my accounts on my website, it goes into great detail about what happened.
Right. Okay. All right. Very good. Hold on. Are you on a cell phone, Bruce, right now?
Yeah.
Okay. You might want to turn your head turn the phone in a different direction. Seems it might be breaking up a little bit. Anyway, that's an astonishing story. Hold on. We'll come right back with more. And do take a look during the break at the write-up that Bruce put together about this experience. It's right there in Guests. Back in a minute.